Legislation that would clear the way for insurance companies to hike rates without approval is almost through the legislative process in Baton Rouge.
Sabrina Wilson has more on that and how Louisiana stacks up against other states in terms of regulating insurers.
A bill that would let insurance companies raise rates without the insurance commissioner's approval was halfway through the legislative process at the state capitol.
But prior approval regulation has not resulted in reasonable insurance premiums. Where there is not a healthy competition between insurers, the price goes up.
But before it won final state house approval, there was pushback.
I think it would make people in the state even more irate.
Louisiana is in the midst of an insurance crisis. Some insurers failed after Hurricanes Laura and Ida, and others stopped writing wind and hail coverage below I-10 and I-12.
If we can't regulate rates, then frankly, that's a vital part, an essential part of making sure that insurance is affordable and available and fairly implemented.
Insurance Commissioner Jim Donelon strongly opposes allowing insurers to raise rates without first getting approval.
They would substitute the prior approval by the insurance commissioner with what's called use and file.
Use and file basically means that the new rate or the new rate structure takes effect immediately. So you have two phrases in the insurance industry. You have use and file and use. Use and file states allow for insurers to get into a market very quickly and to change their rates very quickly.
Michael Berry is with the Insurance Information Institute, an industry-funded information organization that says it doesn't lobby or sell insurance. According to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, 17 states have prior approval in place, and a few others have flex rating and prior approval. Berry commented on how flex works.
Which basically says if you're the insurer and you're either raising rates or decreasing rates 5% in a certain line of business, that can just take effect immediately without any rate filing approval.
HB 489 will still allow the Commission of Insurance to disapprove filings that are unfairly discriminatory or violate Louisiana law.
This month, MarketWatch came out with property insurance averages for all 50 states, and according to MarketWatch, it's cheaper in the two most populous states than in Louisiana. In New York, the average cost of homeowners insurance is $2,573. In California, it's $1,584, but head south, and in Florida, it's $2,528. Alabama is $1,000 higher at $2,668. Mississippi, $3,900, and Louisiana is over $3,000, and Texas is $4,800.
That doesn't surprise me at all. The Insurance Information Institute follows this nationally. The cost of insurance, the price of insurance, is based on the actual and anticipated losses in each state. And Louisiana, you look back to the 2020-2021 hurricane season's extraordinary damage.
And now it's up to the state Senate to consider this bill.